This is Great Vocal Majority's review of the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employee Situation Summary for the month of March 2015. My name's Tony Codispati, and each month I do this review of the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Situation Summary. So let's get started. Here's a highlights chart. I know it's kind of busy, but let me take you through the numbers. U3 is the official unemployment rate. It remained unchanged at 5.5%, but we did create in the month 126,000 jobs. That's the good news. The bad news is that it was less than half of what was created in the month of February. Now, how does that happen? How do you create 126,000 jobs but still have the unemployment rate remain unchanged? Well, the way the unemployment rate is calculated, it's the number of unemployed over the total labor force. And the number of unemployed actually went down by 130,000 people, which roughly equates to the number of jobs created. However, the labor force also went down by 96,000 people, which meant that those two numbers kind of offset each other, going in the same direction. So even though we created 126,000 jobs, the U3 unemployment rate did not change. Now, long-term unemployed, which are people who are out of work more than 27 weeks, which is more than 6 months, that number went down by 146,000 people, which in and of itself you would think is a good thing, except it doesn't appear as though those people found jobs, because the workforce participation rate also went down, which implies that at least some portion of that 146,000 people who are no longer long-term unemployed were just discouraged and stopped looking for work altogether. And that's been the problem in this economy that we've been experiencing during this entire recovery, that this long-term unemployment rate problem is a big problem. Now, the workforce participation rate went down by 1/10 of a point, and that is a continuation of a very long-term trend that we've been seeing. So how does that happen? How do we create jobs but still have the workforce participation rate go down? Well, that number is calculated by the number of people in the workforce, which, as I said before, went down 96,000 people. And then it's also the growth in the civilian population. The civilian population grew by 181,000 people. So you had the number of people in the labor force decreasing while you had the number of people in the population increasing by nearly double the number. So that's how you ended up with a lower workforce participation rate. When it comes to hours and wages, weekly hours were down slightly, reflecting lower labor demand. Not a good thing, which is, kind of goes in line with this 126,000 number coming off a much higher number in the prior month. But even though hours were down, wages were up by 7 cents, which may not look like a lot, but that's actually a pretty decent number. Now, if we go to the next slide, what you have here is the U3, or the official unemployment rate, as a time series going back from 1953 during the Eisenhower administration all the way to today. And what this is an annualized rate. So what you see here in this red line going up and down, this is the annualized unemployment rate during these presidential administrations. And the current month's rate for U3 is this blue line right here. So what this is really telling you is that the current annualized rate under Obama, this area here, is higher than at any point since the first few years of the Clinton administration. So this gives you a perspective of how the economy is doing under President Obama in terms of the unemployment rate the official unemployment rate. Moving on to the next chart, this is U6, which is the unemployment rate that takes into account discouraged workers, people who are marginally attached to the labor force, and I have the definition of it down here. U6 is the total unemployment plus all persons marginally attached to the labor force plus total employed part-time for economic reasons, meaning people who would rather be working full-time if they could, as a percent of the civilian labor force plus all persons marginally attached. And this is also a time series chart using the same method as the last chart. The blue line here shows the current month's rate, and then the red line shows the annualized U6 rate from the Clinton era on. And you can see that the Obama era line still remains above anywhere it's been since Clinton. Moving on to the next chart. This chart answers the question, who leaves the workforce? Retirees and discouraged workers primarily. I mean, there are people embedded in these numbers that are leaving because they are going on disability. But there's been a false rumor, or not rumor, but it's a false narrative that's been put out there that says, well, the reason why the people that are not in the labor force are growing so much is due to retirees. Well, that's not entirely false, but it's really not the reason why we've seen such an increase. What you see in the top red line here, and remember this goes from 1995 to 2014, this red line is the retirees. And you could see from 1995 the retirees kind of peaked, then they flattened out for a period, then they declined. And now over the last few years they're kind of in this channel that I bracketed out here for you. You could see they are going up gradually. Down here are discouraged workers. And you could see that discouraged workers kind of declined during the Clinton years, which was a period of essentially full employment. Then they sort of worked within this channel here from 1500 to 2000. And then right around the time Obama was inaugurated, you could see going back to here, this is the beginning of the recession. That the recession drove up discouraged workers tremendously. And it stayed there for a while and has been coming down, but it's still way over the average, which is this dotted line here. You can see that this is a clear indication that the number of people that are out of the workforce right now and the increase in that number during the Obama years is not due to this gradual increase, it's due to this dramatic increase. And that's discouraged workers. Let's go to the next chart. This is the same chart as the previous chart, except this chart just shows it as a percentage of the total. So in other words, who leaves the workforce? Retirees or people who are going that are discouraged. So what you see here is it's just another depiction, shows the ratio of retirees to the percentage of people leaving the workforce. And right here you could see that in 2007, 72%, meaning 28% of the people leaving the workforce were discouraged. But look at down here in 2010, 56% of the people leaving the workforce were retirees. That means 44% were discouraged. That's a much bigger number, 28% up here, 44% down here. And still today, it's 36%. So still, we're at levels that are still higher, which reinforces what you saw on the last chart. We'll go to the next chart now, and this chart here is the ratio of full-time employment to part-time employment. I think I stated that backwards. It's part-time employment to full-time employment. Now, since the passage of Obamacare, there's been another false narrative kind of thrown out there that part-time people are being thrown into part-time work because of Obamacare. It's not entirely false, but it's not exactly true. Because what this chart kind of shows you, it goes from 1980 to all the way to the current period. And what it shows you is that when the recession began, there was a surge in, look at that surge up in people working part-time as a percentage of people employed. And when you see that, what that's basically telling you, whoops, let me go back. I screwed up. Hang on. Sorry about that. Anyway, getting back to where I was, what this chart essentially is telling you is that here you see the surge in part-time employment relative to full-time that was caused by the recession. And where I've pinpointed the passage of Obamacare happened at the peak of the recession or the peak of part-time employment. And since then, part-time employment has declined. Now, you might look at this and say, well, this proves that Obamacare did not result in more part-time employment. And so that's false. Well, not exactly. Because let's go back and look at the previous recession, 1982, where we peaked at a very similar level. But look at how much more steeply the level of part-time employment fell. It fell much more steeply than you see here. Here it's going back and forth in fits and starts. It's generally down, but it is not going down fast. And that could be due to Obamacare. So it's a false narrative to say that Obamacare is leading to more part-time employment, but it's not necessarily false to say that the passage of Obamacare is resulting in fewer full-time jobs as a percentage of total full-time jobs, because that appears to be the case. Now, you would need to do more analysis, but I think that you can draw the conclusion here simply by comparing to the 1982 recovery out of that recession. Okay, we can go on to the next chart now. Now, this chart, I think, is probably the most important chart I have in this entire set, and that's the percentage of long-term unemployed. Obama has really failed to create enough jobs to reduce this astronomically high rate of long-term unemployed. Now, what you see down here are the percentages under each presidential administration, and what those percentages represent is of the total people who are unemployed, what percentage have been unemployed more than 6 months? The average of all the presidents between Reagan and George W. Bush averaged to about 16%. In other words, 16% of the people who were unemployed during those presidents' administrations were unemployed more than 6 months. Under Obama, that percentage is 38%. And this is where it is today. It's around 30%. And it's still more than double, almost double, rather, the average of what it was since 1980. That's really bad. That shows that we have unemployed people that just cannot get work, and that's why a lot of those people are ending up out of the workforce. Keep in mind, the people who are out of work more than 6 months are in the unemployment number. They are not in the number that's not in the labor force. Those are in addition to this. So that shows you the scope of the unemployment problem we have. Going to the next chart, here's youth unemployment. Now, youth unemployment is still pretty bad, but one thing I will say positively is that it is heading in the right direction. The top line here, this black line, is black unemployment, black youth unemployment, and it is still way above the white and Hispanic rates, but it is coming down faster, and that is a positive sign, even though the black and the Hispanic rates are still substantially below the black unemployment rate for youths. They are also coming down, but they're not coming down quite as fast as the black rate. It's actually good to see the black rate coming down as fast as it is, because at some point you would hope that this rate could be, and all of these lines can converge at some point. It's hard to extrapolate numbers because a lot of this is based on, economic realities. But the good thing is that it is heading in the right direction. So let's go on to the final chart. Final chart is weekly earnings. This is the average weekly earnings spanning from March of 2007 to February of 2015. And what you see here is how this number bounces all over the place. Of course, down here you can see the trough of the recession. And up here, this is the 2010 peak. And then it began to slide again. So, we had earnings that had peaked, and they had actually gotten higher than where they were prior to Obama's first term in office. But since then, they began to slide. I can't explain that. I mean, I could speculate. I believe personally it has a lot to do with Obama's penchant for regulatory control, and that tends to weaken incomes, tends to weaken demand for labor, and that tends to hurt earnings. Because remember, this is the average weekly earnings. This is not the rate of per hour. This is calculated by using the BLS reported hourly wages and for the average, and then multiplying them by the average hours and comparing it to the same month in the prior year. So anyway, what we have here now is we do have since for about the past year, from December of 13, since the federal shutdown, we are edging back up, and we are now above where we had been, kind of in a back and forth here. So now we're up, growing wages at around 2.5%, which is a little bit better than inflation and not bad really when you consider everything. Anyhow, that's it for my analysis of the Bureau of Labor Statistics report from March of 2015. I hope you got something out of this. If you go to the website, I should be posting this very shortly, and you'll be able to download this if you would care to do that. I also have links there to the source materials, and there's even a cheat sheet that I didn't include in this package, but it contains all the relevant Bureau of Labor Statistics report data in the month that might be of use to you. In any event, that's it. That's it for me. I'll speak to you soon. Thanks for watching, guys.